All right, I think we are now officially live. Welcome. I've got Averie Swanson here. Good friend of mine. One of the people that I always point to the most when people ask me, who inspires you in the beer world, who's doing cool things. Almost always, her name comes up, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that. I think this is someone who's been super influential in the beer world for a number of years and has more than deserves the respect that she commands. I've got a little bio here. Avery is a beer lover and mixed fermentation enthusiast. She's the founder and beer maker of Keeping Together in Chicago, Illinois, co-owner and former head brewer of Jester King Brewery in Austin, Texas as well. So you may have heard of Jester King Brewery. Avery's been pretty instrumental in the growth and development of beers over there. Avery is one of 19 people to have earned the certification of Master Cicerone and is recognized worldwide for her contribution to farmhouse brewing. And having seen Avery, at various places around the world, I would agree with that. You've definitely had a pretty strong history of traveling and spreading the gospel of great farmhouse brewing.
I'm trying.
So
Thanks for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
Yeah. So this is somewhat a new format for our Escarpment Labs webinars. I know the last, it's been 6 weeks now. The last 6 weeks of this have been really focused on technical content, on just kind of drilling as much information as possible into people's brains. After our webinar series, we decided to take a little bit of a step back and say, okay, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make this so that it's something we can do and want to do every single week, and settled on this format of an educational webinar every Tuesday, and then an interview with a brewer that we think has something important to say every Thursday. So we'll be talking to some of the brewers that we know all around the world, but we're also going to be highlighting local brewers as well in our local area in Ontario, Canada. Really just trying to see what other people have to say as well. So it's not just me and Nate and the rest of the gang out here talking about yeast. I really want to get other people's perspectives as well. So Avery, I do want to thank you for agreeing to this one. I know it's something we had talked about a little while ago, so I'm glad we were able to coordinate the time. So thank you.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, honestly, thank you for doing all of the technical stuff that you guys have been putting on. I've listened to several of them, and the one on THP I thought was really great and really informative. I made Pat sit down and listen to it with me too. And like between the two of us, as people that have spent the last several years of our lives studying beer and flavor and trying to get a grip on all of that, there was a ton of content in there that we hadn't heard of before and didn't know. So you guys are putting gold content out there. So I appreciate that.
I appreciate that. We did that presentation last year. We put on this little beer and wine symposium with a beer and wine bar in Toronto called Paradise Grapevine. And it was really cool doing that talk to some wine industry people. And apparently that led to people arguing over which type of THP they were tasting at a wine bar that night. Like that's exactly what we're trying to get at.
That's awesome.
We want people to think about these things, think about flavor in a more critical way, and that's awesome.
Yeah, rad.
Got a bit of an outline here, and certainly there's no shortage of things for us to talk about. I do want to ask the question first. What are you drinking?
I am drinking a lager.
Okay.
I had a good friend drop off some beers for me a couple days ago. He had driven up here from Colorado and brought me some Bierstadt, who has just recently started throwing some stuff in cans given the situation. So he brought me some of the slow pour pills, of course, which I have one can left of. And then they brought this, which I guess is a collaboration with Finn's Manor, which is an awesome beer and wine and cocktail bar in River North, I think in Denver. And it is made with Bolita Azul and Bolita Belatove, heirloom corn from Oaxaca. And on the bottom it says Lager, Tacos, Mezcal, Repeat. It was packaged like 6 days ago. So I feel very grateful to be able to enjoy this beer. It tastes great.
Did they? Wow. Yeah, that's right up your alley.
Yeah. Well, they're making truly some of the very best lager in the country. And yeah, if I lived in Denver, I would probably be drunk all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I've never been to Denver. Then that's like, honestly, like, Bierstadt and that whole vibe is, it's definitely in the top 5 for when travel becomes possible.
Yeah.
I like your phrasing, the situation. We can refer to it as the situation from now on if you want.
Well, you were my last friend that I saw before this all happened. You were here the day it all happened. So, I haven't talked to many people about this, but Richard and I have made a beer together. It's still in tank right now, but not for too much longer. Very excited about it, but he braved the crazy situation and came down here the week before everything really shut down. So, I just remember us coming to pick you up on that Saturday at the bread shop and to try to grab lunch, and like the shit was hitting the proverbial fan at that moment. So I'm glad that you were able to come down and make it out and make it back.
Yeah, no, I mean, in retrospect, yeah, totally.
Had no
I'm
idea
not sure if I would have made those decisions the same way, but
Yeah.
At the same time, that was the week where everything was changing. Not even every day, but every hour, right?
Yeah.
And it was all downhill after Tom Hanks, really.
Truly.
That was the turning point. Like I don't think any of us are going to forget, Tom Hanks getting COVID and the NBA shutting down. Like that was the turning point, really.
Yeah, I just remember with a couple friends, we were trying to put on an event for CBC down in San Antonio, and we had been going back and forth, every other day. We were just like waiting for the ball to drop for CBC to be canceled, and the BA didn't say anything for ages, and then finally they called it off. And we were like, I don't understand. Like literally every professional sport league has been shut down in the country. Like if the NBA isn't going on, CBC probably shouldn't be going on. But anyway, yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
6 weeks. It feels, I don't know, it feels shorter than that to me. It also feels like an eternity. So.
Absolutely. Like I think you texted me yesterday saying, hey, our beer is tasting pretty good. I think I'll bottle it soon. And like, number one thought was, oh yeah. And then number two thought was like, oh, it's been 8 weeks. Like, what the fuck?
It's wild.
Yeah, very wild. I don't know what's happened in the last 8 weeks, but it's been a wild ride.
Blur.
We're doing our best to keep safe and keep healthy, and hopefully you guys are as well over in Chicago. Have you? It sounds like you've been able to get into the brewery and do some stuff.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to be as kind of insulated as I am with the project. Not having a physical location of my own and employees and things like that, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more in depth here in a second. But my production schedule really hasn't changed a whole ton. I've been doing about the same rate and pace as I would have been doing otherwise. I would say that it's been, we haven't been able to sell any draft of the Keeping Together beer. I haven't tried to put it on for like crowler fills or anything like that, or growler fills. We were able to sell the remaining bottles of the second release through the tap room bottle shop. So that's been positive, but yeah, I mean, there's almost like a little bit of like I won't say survivor's remorse, but there's kind of a there's almost like a little bit of guilt for being in the position of like, I just feel so grateful to not have employees that I'm having to worry about and take care of. And, Half Acre, I think, has done a really great job. The brewery that's hosting Keeping Together, they've done a great job of trying to, mitigate any sort of damage to their employees' livelihoods and things like that. But, it's a struggle for everybody. So.
Yeah, no, it's tough. And yeah, even just like looking back at, I mean, I feel like, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's almost like it's become normal, now, and or normalized. Maybe normalized is a better way to put it. Um, but yeah, looking back, 5, 6 weeks, it's like no one knew what the heck was going to happen. And, there are, just all of these trolley cart dilemmas every day. Yeah, I can't imagine being in their perspective with so many staff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, we still don't really know what's going to happen, especially in the US, because there seem to be so many different factions of people that have different ideas about what's going on and how things should go. And I don't think that any of that has really lent any more clarity or security, or it hasn't appeased or rather ameliorated anyone's anxiety about anything. So it'll be interesting to continue to observe and exist in it and see how things go. I think adaptability is key, and just trying to be good to people, because everybody's having a hard time. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're sort of hitting on the nail on the head. There's a much greater need for, compassion and empathy right now, especially in business. And got to say, I think reading the Keeping Together website, and it's the first time I've ever seen the word empathy used in the description of a brewing business. So kudos to that.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's really, it's been a strange, just like for me personally and for my business, for the last 2 months to kind of wrap my head around just like how to apply the name of my company and what my mission personally and as a business owner is. I came up with the name for Keeping Together in probably May of last year. So after many months of deliberation and back and forth, and I didn't, the idea was like, I wanted to name my company something that would be a resonant message for people, that when people said it out loud, it would make them feel good and it would remind them of what the world needs. And I did not expect that within a year, it would be very much that. So it's been kind of a crazy thing to wrap my head around. And I haven't really spoken out too much through my social media channels or anything about that, because I don't know. I think that everybody has, many people have good intentions in wanting to talk about it, but it really has been a very turbulent or tumultuous kind of emotional experience for people. And, you really only need to have the word together shoved down your eyes so many times before you're like, I get it. And just say we need it, but not really offer any solutions is, I don't know. I feel like I would prefer to have some sort of concrete way of providing that to people before I start talking a lot about it. That being said, I'm still trying to make beer, and that is, I guess, the way in which I'm going to be able to make all of this real. So at least that's the hope. So.
Yeah. I guess it is I'm not going to say ironic. Maybe it's ironic. I don't know the name. Keeping together at a distance. That's what I should have called this, actually. Wow. Just circling back a little bit. I think just to get a little bit of context, could you explain sort of maybe just a little bit of the path that led to starting Keeping Together?
Yeah.
Your life between Jester King and Chicago.
Yeah. So let's see. Let's rewind to fall of 2018. I took the Master Cicerone exam in October of 2018 for the third time. I did not pass it the first 2 times I took it, despite being very close. I like to say, because I hate the fact that I failed it twice, but I did end up passing it the third time finally. My partner Pat, he lives here in Chicago. We'd been dating long distance for several years. And it was kind of just like, okay, I'd finally passed the test. Long distance thing was kind of wearing on me. I'd been at Jester King for about 6 years and was kind of at a place where it's like, there's not really any more growth for me from like a position. I have ownership in the company. I was a head brewer. There just really wasn't like a trajectory there left for me. I could have stayed there for as long as I wanted to, but I had been working a ton, traveling a ton, and I just, the company had been changing quite a bit over the course of 2018. And I was kind of just like ready for a change. I had some family stuff going on too. So all that to say, I put in my notice and left at the end of 2018, moved up here to Chicago, spent basically the first half of last year kind of getting my shit together, enjoying not working and kind of dealing with all the family stuff that had been going on. And kind of just allowing the ideas that I had for what I wanted to do to marinate. I did have an idea that I wanted to start my own beer brand. I felt like after having passed the exam that I had a fair amount of visibility in the industry. And obviously my position at Jester King afforded me a similar kind of visibility. And I wanted to try to make the most of that situation for myself. I wanted to start a tiki bar, but I was like, I can't abandon beer just yet. And so that might still be a thing that happens one day. We'll see. But
I was going to say, when I first met you, you wanted to talk about rum a lot more than you wanted to talk about beer. So that makes a lot of sense.
I do love rum and mezcal. But I mean, beer, I've told people in the past, like, beer is my wife and rum is my mistress and mezcal is the spirit animal. And I think I still feel that way. I mean, honestly, taking some time off really kind of helped me distill down what it was about beer that I really loved and helped me. Yeah, I was like super burnt out, man. I was going to festivals every weekend and, talking to other beer makers, which was always fun. But like, the novelty of all of that had worn off. And it was like, oh, hey, how are you doing? I saw you last week, even though you live in California and I live in Texas. We saw each other at a festival 2 weeks ago. Like the novelty of all of it had kind of, at the risk of sounding terrible, I guess, it had kind of worn off on me and I was tired of living in a suitcase. So, or out of a suitcase. I wasn't living in a suitcase.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I moved up here, I went and visited Half Acre, Lee, who's the special projects brewer, kind of manager of all the barrel stuff there. He's done all of the mixed firm stuff there for ages. He's a good friend, and I went and visited him at Half Acre, ran into Gabriel, who's one of the owners and the founder there, and started kind of chatting with the two of them about, how I didn't have a job and had a lot of time. And, they asked me to do a little bit of consulting on the Wild program just to see, if having some fresh eyes on it would lend any insight for them. Talked a bit about scaling and things like that. Before I knew it, we were talking about what it might look like if I was making my own beer there. And we ended up kind of putting together an arrangement that allows me to do that. So it is kind of a unique legal framework or arrangement. I'm technically an employee there. So I'm on their payroll, but what I'm being paid for, I'm being paid for all of the beer that I'm making out of the profits for the beer that I'm selling. So basically as an employee there, I'm covered under their insurance in the event that anything were to happen to the facility or to me or to anybody else. And we're basically doing keeping together a setup as a DBA under their company license here in Illinois, as well as under their TTB permit with the federal government. So I can legally say, on my bottle labels, it says brewed and bottled by Keeping Together, Chicago, Illinois. which is totally legal and in line with everything, which is what I wanted. Basically, this was the fastest way for me to be able to make beer and sell beer. Had I tried to do like an alt prop situation with them, it would have taken a long time to get the TTB to approve my permit. And even if it didn't, that was like a fear or a consideration. I didn't want to do contract brewing because I wanted to actually make the beer myself. That's what I got into. That's what I got into this industry to do. Yvonne Debates is a good friend of mine, and I know he doesn't take too kindly to a lot of contract brewing arrangements. And so I was like, if I'm not making my own beer, if I'm contract brewing, Yvonne's going to kill me. I can't, I have to honor him. And
he would have some stern words for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm brewing the beer myself. I'm managing the fermentation myself, packaging everything myself with the assistance of Lee. And yeah, we've released 2 beers so far. And we've got 2 more packaged and ready to go. And I've got a couple more in tank right now and several more that I plan to brew this year. And yeah, it's small and it's manageable for me. I don't know, it affords me the lifestyle that I'm more interested in living at this point in my life, which is not necessarily traveling every weekend, not living in a suitcase, not, just drinking all the time. And I feel much better for all of that. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's a really compelling business model that I really haven't seen that explored all that much. And, from what I understand, it is possible to do in a lot of jurisdictions, right? This idea of someone being an employee of a brewery, but producing a separate product under a separate label with a profit sharing model, as long as that person is bringing some kind of skill set or intellectual property to that mix, and that diversity of products is bringing some value to that brewery. I think that's a great combination, right? For Half Acre, who maybe they haven't focused on these kinds of beers in the past. It gives them a way to offer something new to those customers. They're still people coming into the Half Acre tap rooms and bottle shops, but they can buy something else. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's working out well so far. And I agree. It's not something that I've really heard anybody else talk about. I feel like even just thinking about like situations where that might have been the case, I could think of maybe one for sure, maybe. It kind of seemed like that may have been something that side project had done. But to be totally honest, I never really asked Corey about it directly, about the legal framework behind all of it. But yeah, I think it's so far working out well. I do think that, obviously it's a risk. It's a risk for both parties. I had talked a little bit with Lafler over at Off Color about doing something similar there. And, he and I were super good friends and really close. And there was the consideration of like, maybe I don't want to blend my work life and my friend life so closely in a way that in like pretty uncharted territory, not knowing how it would work and what issues might arise, and just kind of wanting to keep that a little bit cleaner. I think with Half Acre, there's an element of separation from me and the people that originally, who the folks that originally sat at that table to talk about how it would all happen. Like Gabriel's not super involved in production. And so he doesn't have to, I don't have to worry about upsetting him or doing anything wrong and he being like, get out. Lee and I work really closely together, but he's one of the most laid back people in the world. So I don't really worry about that. But, Half Acre is big enough to where they've got orchestrated beer runs, all of their production, inventory and scheduling and things like that, which is its own seminar worth of things to talk about. So all of the raw materials and packaging supplies that I use go through their ERP. So I engage with the folks that are managing that and running that production in order to get ingredients and stuff that I need. I buy a lot of the ingredients myself and have Half Acre reimburse me as a vendor. So there's, there are definitely like some wrinkles in it that we've had to kind of iron out over time. But I would say overall, Having the experience that I have, I feel like I'm not a huge burden on their system. And it's very much my intention not to make more work for people. I want to be able to keep the project small enough and manageable enough that I'm not needing to recruit other people to do things for me. So I don't know. It's been fun to learn. Jester King was really my only professional brewing gig, and it's just been nice to like be in a different space and see how people do things, and it allows me to question some of the things that I thought to be true and the way things had to happen. And I think that having fresh eyes on systems has also been beneficial to them. So it's been a pretty mutually symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. And I do think that, there is an opportunity, maybe some of the people listening, realize that, there's some people that are, either you're, maybe you're a brewer, but you're not, super stoked on, the stuff that you're brewing day to day, or you're a home brewer and you really want to, get more beer in more people's hands. There is this sort of, third option between building a brewery and contract brewing, where you might be able to make the beer you want to make, using, someone else's facility, especially in breweries that might be seeing a downturn in production. There might be more tanks empty in the next little while, and maybe that's an opportunity for some people to to take the plunge, and ultimately the more people that can get involved in brewing, we can get a little bit more diversity of ideas and thoughts, and that is part of what we need right now, right? The beer in a lot of ways has started to get very samey, and it's important to get away from that. That's why I thought the keeping together business model was very refreshing, because this is a way that people who may not otherwise have for example the capital or the time to get into this might be able to.
And it was also kind of a coming into 2019 2020, the state of the industry in the States, where there's so many breweries, and like you say, a lot of same people making the same things, and not everybody is, many people had expanded their facilities and new tanks, but there's the same finite amount of shelf space. People not really being able to use their facilities to the fullest extent that they built them to. So, opportunities for us as individuals to go in and make beer, but also opportunities for breweries to not, kind of let their tanks sit empty, or, leverage other people's kind of enthusiasm or, fresh ideas for the profit and success of their own breweries. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I very wholeheartedly support this kind of approach. There's just so much capital tied up in the industry that any way for people to get creative products on the market without having to buy more stainless is awesome.
Yeah.
Sort of just circling back on the beers, can you maybe we'll could we do a little bit of a run through of the beers that you've released so far?
Yeah.
In order.
So the first beer that I released was a beer called The Art of Holding Space. It was a table beer at 3% ABV. Everything's been mixed culture fermented so far, and will continue to be. So honestly, The Art of Holding Space was very much my homage to Petit Prince, table beer from Jester King. One of my favorite, desert island beers. It's a wonderful beer, but it's, I went from having like an endless supply to having virtually none. And because we hadn't brewed it like in the months leading up to me leaving. And it's like, what am I going to do? I'm going to take this Colonel Toby up. And I love Colonel Toby very much.
I love that beer too, yeah.
Yeah, but Petit Prince is like, the best. So I made this table beer kind of as an homage to that, primarily so that I could have a table beer to drink. But it picked up quite a bit of acidity in bottle, dry hopped with Czech slots the same way that Petit Prince is. But one of the major tweaks that I made to that beer was we never really brewed it with oats at Jester King. It was primarily Pilsner and wheat, always. And so for this beer, I wanted it to be a bit more full in body. I've got a thing for texture in mouthfeel. So I was like, I just want it to be a little bit fuller, a little bit silkier. So I beefed up the oats quite a bit. Maybe I went a little overboard on the oats. I added some spelt, some wheat, and was kind of trying, I went from JK where we were using raw well water and we didn't really do any sort of modification to the water profile of the beers. But the water up here is fairly soft. So I tried to recreate the water profile a little bit with very little experience in manipulating water chemistry. And water chemistry, even for me, is like intimidating and crazy. And so I was like, I don't want to overdo it. But at any rate, I think that the water profile definitely had an impact in the final profile of the beer, flavor profile. But yeah, so that was the first beer released in green bottles out of the Half Acre tap room. And then beer number 2 is called Architects of Harmony. And there you go.
Hey, that's what I'm drinking right now, by the way.
Excellent.
It's delicious.
I'm glad you like it.
Really, really lovely.
Matured quite I don't know. Like, I think that it tastes just as good now as it did when it was first packaged. It's definitely a hoppier beer. So re-fermented with base Saison, chilled Saison, re-fermented with black locust honey from here in Illinois, and then dry hopped with Michigan Chinook. So the Chinook had a crazy amount of just like super melon and like star fruit, really tropical flavors. And I thought that it melded really well with the flavor of the honey. The black locust honey was like real sweet. It had a good amount of depth of flavor, kind of almost touch smoky. But I would say overall, I'm very happy with how that beer turned out. The honey gives it a really awesome texture, and the foam is like pretty. We were talking about this before we went live. The foam is like simultaneously crunchy and creamy. It's kind of a weird combo, in my opinion. But I'm real happy with how that beer turned out. So.
Yeah, no, across the board, really lovely. Like, as hoppy Saisons go, really nicely balanced. And yeah, I love the foam, love the texture. There's like a little bit of that sort of, I don't know how to describe it, like crackly, saline kind of thing that you get in some Saisons. I know you said you're doing some futzing around with the water to sort of get there. I think that's really important. Like beer like Saison, where it's totally dry, there's no residual sugars. You almost need to like season the water or have, interesting water because it can shine through. And I think whatever you've done here does. And obviously like the malts themselves, right? If you've got, nothing left, it has a interesting flavor, and, every malt is a little bit different.
Yeah. And that's something too, I like very much learning how to use the kit at Half Acre. It's a super old brew house. I want to say it was like the original Uinta brew house in like the 90s. And then like Ska Brewing had it for a while. I'm not super familiar on the entire history, but it is an old brew house. It's super manual. Like the temperature probes don't really work. It feels very much like brewing on the kit at Jester King. That was a very manual brew house where like you have to use your flashlight to kind of touch the water valve a little bit so that you can make sure that the temperature is right. And it's very, it requires a degree of like intuitive brewing that I missed after leaving Jester King. And I can't imagine myself brewing on like a different kind of brew house that's like all, automatic with buttons and stuff like that. So I'm glad that that's the case, but it's interesting because like talking to the brewers there, and asking them like, well, what kind of like hop utilization or do you typically see, at this stage or that stage? And they're like, I don't really know. I'm like, so all of the beers have turned out a little bit more bitter than I originally wanted them to be, which I don't mind. I really enjoy bitter beers, but it's resulted in a little bit of a kind of like, okay, how is the mixed culture kind of responding to this? If I change, I don't know. It's just been a really awesome learning experience. So it's been fun, but there's still a lot to learn, and I'm brewing so infrequently that it's kind of a like, I don't know, you learn a lot, and then, you know, a lot of time goes by, and then you're like, okay, I have to apply all that stuff that I learned again, but I don't remember a lot of it. So I don't know. It's just, it's put me in a position of, I'm not going to say discomfort, but I'm a little bit outside of the comfort zone, in that it's like just very much learning how to develop the muscle memory. So it's good. It's a place of growth.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where a lot of the most, you know, a lot of accelerated growth comes from is getting outside the comfort zone and just, you know, kind of diving into something, new brew house, or, you know, new ingredients or whatever, right?
Yeah. New city.
New city, yeah. Little
new
chillier.
So, yeah, it's been fun. And then the third beer we're releasing in a week or so. Labels are supposed to get here tomorrow or Monday. And that beer is a Saison, believe it or not. I'm brewing almost exclusively Saison, probably to my financial detriment. But at least I'll feel creatively fulfilled. It's a Saison made with primarily British malts, because there were a bunch of extra bags of that lying around, and my farmhouse roots are strong. I was like, oh, if you guys aren't going to use those, I can make something with that. Golden Promise, some Maris Otter, some oat malt, I think, and Earl Grey tea, oranges, and some saffron at packaging. So I'm stoked on that beer. And then beer number 4 is a beer that is made with lavender smoked barley from Sugar Creek Malting in, they're in Indiana, right? Indiana. They're nearby.
Indiana. I just listened to a podcast where is the guy's name Caleb?
Yeah.
Yeah, an interview with them, and it was super fascinating.
Awesome. Yeah, dude, his malt is amazing. And he came by, or one of his sales guys came by and tasted us through a bunch of different things. And I tasted this lavender smoked malt and was like blown away. It was some of the weirdest shit I've ever tasted. And I was like, I'm going to make a beer with that. It's very expensive malt, but it was very worth it. It's one of the more interesting, one of the more interesting flavor profiles that I've experienced in a beer. So I'm stoked on that one.
Yeah, you poured a sample from the tank, and I don't think it was that old at the time. It was maybe a couple weeks.
It was a week old. I brewed it the Friday before you were there.
Yeah, you poured a sample and just sort of left the cup out, and like, I don't know if you noticed, but I just kept walking back to just smell this cup, because it was one of the best smelling beers, most unique sort of flavor profiles that I've encountered. Can you describe what that beer tasted like to you, or tastes like to you?
Man, I opened a bottle of it last week, and it very much tastes like mezcal. And I don't know if it's like the intention there, like it has kind of it's got these awesome like floral top notes that are definitely there, that are reminiscent of the lavender, but there's also kind of like a white flower kind of thing there, just like really delicate floral top notes. But then the smoke character has very, it's cold smoked with lavender. So the smoke isn't really, it's not the like beefy, meaty, bacony kind of smoke character. It is almost like a smoke character that sits on top of the rest of the flavor. Has very much like a like terracotta, or almost kind of like artichoke-y kind of flavor profile. It's really earthy, and I don't know. Like I said, it was very reminiscent of like a high elevation Tobola mezcal to me, which is my favorite kind of mezcal. So I don't know. I'm very happy with how that beer tastes. I ended up conditioning it with honey because it was a little bitter. It was hopped with EKG on the hot side. I figured that the like floral notes of that hop would blend well with the lavender smoke. And I'm very happy with it, but it has a little bit more, it had a little bit more of an assertive bitterness than what I originally wanted for it. And conditioning it with honey, I think softens that a little bit. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked on how the finished beer is in package. It's carbonated. Yeah.
Again, that was pretty mind blowing to me. Smelling this thing that's made with, English hops and Saison yeast and lavender malt, and it's, it smells like a margarita with a mezcal margarita, really.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Pretty crazy. That's really special. I think they're doing cool things. Can you talk a little bit about Sugar Creek malt?
I mean, to be honest, I don't know a ton about them. I know Caleb is working his ass off to make some of the best malt in the country. They've built like a traditional sign house out on his property, a like Nordic smokehouse for the malt. He invited me out to the like collaboration brew day that they had in January or early February this year. I think Burial was out there and Scratch was out there, but I put myself on a travel ban, so I didn't make it. I'm very disappointed, especially now that I've been cooped up in here for 5 months now. But at any rate, it's all the pictures look gorgeous. All of the malts that I've tasted look awesome. I want to say that he's in the process of either building or planning a brewery out there, a small brewery out there. So I don't know. He's just like, I want to say multi-generation farmer, like it's in his family and his blood. And he's just out there with an extreme work ethic, making amazing raw materials for brewers and distillers. And, coming from Texas and working with the folks down at Blacklands Malt in Austin, I was very excited to make it up here. And, I asked Brandon from Blacklands if there was anyone he would recommend. He was like, you have to go check out Sugar Creek, taste their malt. Like, they do a great job. So I was glad that there was somebody up here that I could work with and develop a relationship with who was doing cool things. I don't know. I'm really excited about the things that he's doing. He's approaching malting, I think, in a different way than most other craft maltsters are. And I don't know. I think I find myself more often than not inspired by ingredients or flavor experiences outside of the realm of beer. And so to be able to like taste a raw material that is like so mind blowing is really special.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You sent me a catalog from Sugar Creek when we were sort of planning this beer. And, I've got some familiarity with craft maltsters. We have a great one here in Ontario, Barnell Malt. They do all floor malt and as much as possible sourcing grain grown in the province. But, obviously our climate isn't amazing. Do an awesome job. They do a lot of really cool products, but that Sugar Creek catalog with the, 50 different varieties of malt, cold smoked malts with everything. Like if you want a, malt smoked from a, bourbon barrel or I don't know.
There's all kinds of shit.
You did crazy stuff, mesquite, etc. That was pretty eye-opening. It's like I did not know that this kind of thing existed commercially, and that's it's pretty eye-opening. It's like, I guess, maybe like seeing a yeast catalog for the first time and realizing it's like, oh, wait a second, there's
a lot.
There's more than 3 options.
Yeah.
That was really eye-opening to me because like I'll be the first to admit that I don't think that we give enough credence to malt, and that it's the dominant ingredient in most beers and probably should be considered with more importance by brewers. The amount of beer that's made with the same damn malt all over the continent is a little frustrating, and I think that's going to change. Just like everything has become more specialized when it comes to hops. Like a lot of brewers now will select their hops and try to have something unique. We're seeing some of that happening on the yeast side as well, with brewers using yeast banking and custom yeasts, and I imagine the same thing will happen with malts. So yeah, hearing those guys talking about coming up with custom malts for different breweries, I'm like, yeah, that's the future, man. That's exactly what you should be doing.
Yeah, and I think too, just my experience in beer making over the last 5 or 6 years, I have found a lot of, I don't know, you kind of like get to a point where you're like, I've done that, or somebody else has done that. I don't really want to do that. So how do you continue to modify or manipulate your ingredients in a way that adds depth and character and complexity to your final product? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's very much like cooking. You're taking this, if you can smoke something before you throw it in a sous vide, or doing all of these fairly subtle modifications really early on in your process, it might not seem like it's really adding up, but a lot of times it makes the difference between something that's really familiar and within a box, and it turns it into something that's like really interesting and has this like tiny little thing that you can't quite put your finger on, and keeps you coming back to your glass for another sip because you're trying to figure out what the hell that thing is. Mm-hmm. And I think that to extend that idea into the development of raw materials and ingredients, I think is amazing. I want to say like one of the only other maltsters that I know of that's kind of branching out and doing some weird shit like that is maybe Valley Malt out on the East Coast. Andrea does some pretty incredible stuff. And I remember brewing out at Cambridge with Cambridge Brewing with Will Myers. And he was like, have you tried her kimchi malt? I was like, no, what? And he like, pulls out a bag of like malt that was seasoned with like kimchi, like had been like cured with kimchi or something crazy. And I was just like mind blown. And it was awesome. We just sat there like eating this stuff. Mm-hmm. But she's brilliant, and I've got a huge lady crush on her, but she makes amazing malt. And I don't know, I'm just excited to see maltsters kind of like branching out and doing some weird shit. And
yeah, no, absolutely. It's honestly something that I'm always super excited to look at. As someone who spends all day, in the nitty gritty details of yeast, it's always I love diving into the or listening to people that are just nerding out about hops and malt and everything else, because it's not my world.
Yeah, there's a little bit of wonder and awe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And hearing some of these people talk about terroir, that the fact that the geography of where this crop is grown can impact how it tastes. Like, yeah, it's like you said, there is potentially some kind of edge that can be gained, or some little differentiating factor by having these ingredients. And that's really special. And especially considering that things like local malt, local hops tend to be more expensive, there has to be some other value added, and that might be with respect to flavor or with respect to storytelling as well. I think it's really powerful for a brewery to be able to say that they're actually using local ingredients. They're not getting it from the local distributor who's getting the malt from Germany or whatever. It's actually local. Yeah. And I think we might see more of that pushed to the forefront as well. Yeah. Really blown away by the speed at which craft malting is developing. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, at the end of the day, if it encourages beer makers and beer drinkers to really appreciate where their ingredients are coming from and support their local farmers, and like, bring people back to the tangible physical world that we live in, I think it's worth every extra penny.
Absolutely. Do you think that kind of thing is necessary it sounds like you're almost exclusively making Saisons. Does that especially factor into that beer style where it's, almost supposed to be a, local, do what you can with what you can kind of style?
I would say so. That's definitely the approach that I try to take to it. I don't know, but there's like I feel like there are several facets to that. I mentioned a second ago, like I was using British malts for this third beer, but they were bags of malt that were like left over from other beers that, the folks on the big production side of Half Acre didn't need or want or, have any real use for. So there, for me, is like an element of, it's almost like scavenging, I guess. It's like, hey, I know that you guys, my OCD appreciates that your OCD doesn't want to have this like straggler piece of inventory. I'd be more than happy to take that off your hands. So using the resources available to me, you can apply that to a few different things. But that being said, somebody like Caleb and the work that he's doing at Sugar Creek, I would love to continue to support that. And I think as I continue to kind of streamline my process and how I'm doing what I'm doing at Half Acre, I think that between Lee and I, because Lee uses quite a bit of his stuff too, we could probably move to using that stuff exclusively within a period of time. So that's definitely the hope. Again, using like Michigan hops, things that are grown nearby. For me, Saison, like philosophically, there's definitely like the resource, practicality of resources, and that's a huge part of it. But on like the flavor spectrum side, for me, Saison is very much like a textural experience. And the idea of using, and I've said this before, so if people have heard me say this before, I'm sorry, but it's something that like I've actually been able to whittle down this into like a concise or succinct phrase. But like the texture of your ingredients, your raw materials, and the way that those textures kind of like the friction that is created when you use materials like this, and the creative friction that exists as a maker when you're working with ingredients like that. It's like, I want this thing to be like this, but this thing, it has its own mind. It has its own flavor profile. I will adjust myself in order to get the thing out that I want. So as long as that final, and I think that the final product, I don't know, when you have that approach to it, I do feel like you can taste it in the end. There's like a toothsomeness to the beer, for lack of a better word, I guess. You can, I don't know. I've quoted Maynard James Keenan before, lead singer of Tool. I know everybody laughs at me when I do this, but he, Tool is my desert island band, and I remember seeing him in a documentary on like VH1 or something. I was super young. And I remember he wasn't even talking in this interview. He literally just sat there in front of the camera and then I guess had written what he wanted the subtitles to say. And then it was like this analogy of, when you play guitar, you pluck the string, the action creates the tension, but there's no sound made. There's no music. It's when you release the tension, you release that friction, that the music happens and the sound, the beautiful thing occurs. And that I have always like held that in the back of my mind. And I do, I think about that a lot in beer making. I think that you have to create a little bit of friction, a little bit of tension in order for there to be a creative release. And so when using really rustic ingredients that inherently have a good amount of texture, creates that friction, creates that creative tension, creates the beautiful release eventually.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%, right? Like a lot of the traits of, some of these more rustic or traditional ingredients, maybe it doesn't lend itself well to like a hazy IPA, but it probably lends itself very well to something like a Saison. If you've got a grain that's really prone to, producing tannins, for example, maybe not the best thing for a lager or a hazy IPA, but it could be a big technical or a textural boost for Saison. These things are important. That being said, I don't always hear people talk about these kinds of words. So I think it's important to bring that up. Like how would you define texture in a beer?
Man,
I think it's a way better word than something like mouthfeel. Mouthfeel just makes me feel weird. But
yeah, it's a weird word. I don't know. I think that for me, texture, it's it is hard to talk about it without talking about mouthfeel. But it's like, you think about your mouth and you think about the sense, taste, right? You think about your mouth tastes, whereas your ears hear and your nose smells and your eyes see and your hands touch, but your mouth can touch too. Mm-hmm. So how does the touch experience occur when, some external object or thing hits that tissue? Mm-hmm. So for me, I guess texture is like the touching of your mouth. I don't know. It's hard to talk about without sounding a little creepy, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. It's like if your mouth had tactile sense, it is to experience the texture. So fullness and like silkiness. I don't know. Pat and he's writing a book on sensory and, how to create a sensory program and for small and mid-sized breweries. And I remember early on in the process, he was like, how would you like develop a lexicon for like the sensation of mouthfeel and texture? And we tasted through like a series of styles of beers to try to like talk, is it high intensity, low intensity, but trying to use words that are not so sterile. And it was hard. Even for the two of us as Master Cicerones that think we know shit about beer, it was not an easy exercise. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for you, but I think it's something that there's an opportunity for us to continue to develop that lexicon and how we communicate about that with other people.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing. Do you think that texture is what makes the difference between good beers and great beers?
Definitely. Because I think it's because you can't really assign a word to it. And it's this like it's this experience that transcends your vocabulary. So I would say so. And I think it's also something because we don't talk about our mouths being like tactile, as like a tactile input. It's not something that we're conscious of most of the time. It might be like pleasurable or not, and we're aware of I like that or I don't like that, but you don't necessarily know why because you don't really. Maybe in other cultures there's more awareness there, but I feel like for us in the West or like here in the U.S., it's just not. We don't really talk about flavor, even much less how our food feels in our mouth.
Mm-hmm. We don't really talk about texture, right?
Yeah.
I think that is, one of the, I guess crutches of just Western gastronomy and by extension, I guess, drinking as well. It's like, I feel like we're trained to think that, something that's tender or textureless is high quality, right? If you think about, a piece of meat or whatever, and that, things that have texture or bite or chew or crunch maybe are weird.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's probably a challenge because it makes you think about it, and God forbid you think about what's happening to your body.
Yeah.
Because our brains are trained to, I'm not going to say designed, but they have been adapted such that they pick up changes in what they're experiencing. That's the primary thing. We're here to like experience the change. And when you taste something that is just like totally the same throughout, there's nothing that registers as being different, and therefore your brain doesn't need to be engaged.
Yeah. That's a good point too. Those kinds of contrasts are, I guess, weird and scary, but also necessary, right? It's important to get it's important to get outside of the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
How can Saison compete in a world of pastry stouts and hazy IPAs?
I don't know. I've thought about this quite a bit, and I have a theory. I have a hope, rather. I'm not going to say that I have a dream, but it is a hope. I don't know. I think that the world is very loud right now. The beer industry is very loud right now, in like flavors that are being put out there, between pastry stouts and crazy fruited things and hazy IPAs and all these very extreme, intense flavors. And I do primarily mean like in the US, right? And I do think that it's kind of, so my idea behind this extends beyond the beer industry. Like we live in just a very cacophonous world between advertising and politics, and everybody has an idea and everybody is trying to cram it down your throat, and it's all very loud. The only way that someone's going to receive your message is if you're louder than the other people trying to put that message in your face. And I think that it's a lot of the like collective anxiety and stress that the world seems to feel right now, and is very real, I think comes from not being able to hear yourself over that cacophony. And I think that I hope that people will start to realize that and maybe this like shelter in place event brings us closer to this. But when you kind of slow things down and quiet the ambient sound around you, you begin to actually hear yourself again. I think there's a lot of distrust in a lot of these external parties trying to shove their messages at you. You learn to like not trust other people or other companies or products or whatever. You eventually begin to no longer trust yourself. And I think that this move away from that loudness is definitely a very long-winded and more philosophical response to your question about Saison than
that's okay.
But moving away from that noise, trying to find quiet space so that you can hear yourself again and remember that you can trust yourself. I think, and I hope that people will collectively begin moving back towards that, holding space for themselves, holding space for other people. And for me, I think that Saison is like the quiet beer experience. There's a lot there if you want to look into it. It's like a reflection of who you are if you want to look deep into it. But it's not going to scream at you. It's not going to force you to believe a thing. It's there to provide an experience, but it's an experience that's unique to every person that's drinking it. So, I don't know. I'm still workshopping my ideas on all of this because I think that a lot of people are going to be like, what? It's crazy.
No, and I get it. Yeah.
Saison will save the world eventually.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that is the strength, is that it is something that can be very quiet if it needs to be, right? That's I realized something I realized a little while ago. It's like all my favorite beers are, beers where I can drink this thing and I don't have to think about it whatsoever. I can just enjoy the experience, or I can sit here and pay attention, stare at this thing and analyze everything about it, and it still holds up. And like those are, I think, the best beers that really function in both of those scenarios, right? You can plop it on the middle of the table, having dinner, and everyone enjoys it, has a good time. But if you really want to dive into it and dive into the details, you still can. And things that can strike that balance are really special. And that's not exclusive to Saison. There's lagers that can do that. There's all sorts of kinds of beers that can do that kind of thing, right? But extremely loud beers are just so angular that may not be possible.
Yeah. There's no space for it. There's no like collaborative experience with the really loud beers. And it's, there's a set and setting for everything. And, I can sit down and I can enjoy like a marshmallow stout with peanut butter and chocolate or whatever. Absolutely. But it'll be a very small amount, and it will be like, I'm going to need to be freezing and probably in front of a campfire, or I can have like a really good ice cream. I don't know. It's just, set and setting. But when the industry, the last few months, year, 2 years, all the beers are like kind of crazy ingredient can I put in here?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure you can taste that ingredient. Like, I don't want you to be able to taste anything else. I just want you to taste that. Because, like, I can put some crazy shit in some beer, but I'm not putting it in there so it can be tasted. It's kind of a, you know what I mean? Like, it's if you can taste the ingredient, I added too much. You know, like I talked about, beer number 3 has saffron in it. You can't really, first of all, not many people could really sit down and be like, well, saffron tastes like this. It's kind of an esoteric flavor to begin with. But you really, you know, the saffron in it is so soft and light. And it really, I did a few like bottle tests because I basically made like a saffron syrup and added that to the tank when I was packaging as the conditioning or priming syrup. Excuse me. And, you know, I did a couple experiments, packaged some bottles with and without it prior to packaging. And I tasted the beer without it and it was fine, but I tasted the beer with it and it was just like all of the other ingredients were like actually integrated into like a really nice final presentation. And like you couldn't, I mean, you know, I knew the saffron was there, but it wasn't over the top. It wasn't like out of control. It was soft and it really like added just a little bit of complexity. So I don't know, everything in moderation, try to create something that has balance. I don't know.
And, you know, try to create something that people are going to go back and, you know, pour more of it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I mean, I think this is something that's been pretty widely shared, but there's an article recently about Schoenrammer Brewing and Eric Toft. And, you know, one of the I think quotes from him is like, if someone doesn't immediately order another beer, then you've failed, right? You know, that should be the goal is, you know, making it a seamless experience that people want to keep going.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, alcoholism be damned, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point to make, right? Is I think a lot of you know, craft beer has been driven around constantly novel experiences, but I also think that yeah, maybe people get some time now to reflect and realize that, you know,
balance the novel experience.
Yeah, and maybe yeah, it's cool if you've got, you know, 5,000 ticks on Untappd, but I bet there's still, you know, 5 or 6 beers that you really love and would rather drink than those other 4,900, right?
Mm-hmm. So make sure you go buy more of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise,
Allagash White.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Drink a lot of that beer.
Oh, it's in cans now too. I saw that.
Yes.
We don't get Allagash at all here in Ontario, so
that's terrible.
When we can.
I didn't get it when I was still living in Texas either. They didn't distribute down there.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible.
You have Live Oak Heft though. That's right up there.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I miss the shit out of that beer. It's such an amazing beer. And also their Grodzitsky, they're smoked. Yeah. Smoked
I love that beer too, yeah. On the other end of the spectrum, that's another brewery that just, you know, cranking out those beers that you just want to drink another one of whatever the heck it is, whether it's a Grodzisky or a Pilsner or a
Heft.
Yeah.
Any of their smoked beers, they do a ton of smoked beers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I miss Live Oak. A lot. Absolutely. And I also miss the heat. It's been like very hot down there already.
Yeah, I don't know how people in Texas do it. I've been down there and
shorts.
I mean the furthest into summer I've gone is May and that was oppressive.
Yeah, Pat had a really hard time coming down there when I was still living there. You just sweat. Yeah. I miss it so much.
What it is, yeah.
I miss it so much. It's like 10 degrees here right now, maybe cooler. And it's like, although last year in May it was still snowing, so I'm not complaining.
Oh yeah. I mean we're effectively in this, Toronto and Chicago are effectively the same climate. It's
sister cities
all over the place all the time. Yeah. How would you compare the food scenes between Chicago and Austin?
Oh man, there are nowhere near enough tacos up here.
Yeah.
First and foremost. Yeah, I miss breakfast tacos a lot. I can make them here, so that's fine. But there aren't like taquerias, at least not. We live kind of north of downtown. I want to say the south side of the city. There's a lot more taquerias down there, but I don't know. I feel like Chicago is first and foremost one of the best food cities, I think, in the world. You could live multiple lifetimes here and still not eat all the good food. I would say that Austin has a really great food scene too. I don't know. I would say they're comparable. Chicago's just so much bigger, so there's a lot more. There are a lot more options. Austin, I feel like if you wanted really like traditional, like Vietnamese or Thai food or, anything outside of tacos, like even the Vietnamese and the Thai food would be in a taco. Like Austin is like the fusion taco capital of the world. So, I grew up in Houston and there's a huge Vietnamese population down there, and you could get a banh mi for like $2. It's not as good as the banh mi in Montreal, I will say, but
which place? This is a hot tip.
I want to say it's called Hung Phat.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's called that. But oh my God, it was amazing. Like traditional, like pate. It's right next to one of the big markets.
Okay.
I don't know. I've got my assistant looking it up.
Hey, Pat.
Let's go, guys.
Yeah. Oh my God, so good. But I remember moving.
Fat market.
Hung Phat.
PHAT.
PHAT. He says.
Right.
Best banh mi. Oh my God, so good, and like so cheap, and you can just like walk around to the market otherwise. Yeah, I don't know. I remember being disappointed when I moved to Austin from Houston because people are always like, "Oh, the food in Austin's so good." And I was like, I come from Houston, and like the food in Houston is unbelievably good, and you can actually get like real food, and it's not in a fusion taco. So like Korean barbecue, but it's in a taco. So I don't know. Austin's doing its own thing. They're weird, There's plenty of restaurants there that I miss a lot. We were back down there for my birthday in September of last year, and we had 3 dinners one night. We went to Odd Duck, Emmer and Rye, and Uchiko, and all three.
I love Odd Duck.
Odd Duck is amazing. Best restaurant all around, I would say, in Austin. Uchiko is up there. Oh my God. But it is definitely on the pricier end of the spectrum and is not what you think you would go to Austin to eat. But I mean, there's like Wagyu beef flown in every day from Japan and like some of the most amazing sushi I've ever had in my life. And yeah, the service there is impeccable. So highly recommend. Yes, that's Pat Fahey. The one and only. And Emmer and Rye also, like best cacio pepe in the world.
Wow. Yeah.
I've spent a fair amount of time in Italy, and it's like they mill their own flour in house. It's just, it's so damn good.
That's crazy. That's awesome. Yeah, I was just in Austin in January, and I want to go back now.
Yeah.
I mean, things are all right. I mean, Toronto's got a great food scene, but can't even go and explore that right now. So
yeah,
Guelph.
When we were up there last year, we went to several places and had amazing food. But I was really surprised at how awesome the cocktail scene was up there. We went
Toronto.
Yeah. We
Oh,
went
yeah.
to a Mother cocktail bar, and it was like soft opening. And we just like walked by it and we're like, that place looks cool.
Mm-hmm.
And went inside, and it was some of the best cocktails I've ever had. It was a really cool little spot. We were not there long enough. Toronto seems like a really amazing city.
Yeah, I mean, if and when all this craziness ends, then anytime I'll do. I don't know. I mean, I don't live in Toronto, so I don't know things super well, but know a few spots, and yeah, you're always welcome up here in Canada.
We'll have to do an event at Barvolo or Paradise Grapevine with our beer.
Absolutely, yeah. Either one, to be honest. Yeah, they're both great spaces. Volo, like the original Volo, reopened as well, so it's a new space, but they've done a really good job there. Paradise has a great little sort of like summer patio thing going on too. So there's definitely lots of just for drinking beer in Toronto. It's well, previous to March, it's never been better.
Yeah. Have you spent any time out in Halifax?
A little bit, yeah. Halifax rules. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Stillwell?
Of course, yeah. So Stillwell's like the anchor of like the craft beer scene.
Dude, their beers are like so amazing.
Oh, so the beer, and they make beer as well. So yeah, Chris Reynolds at Stillwell, sort of got this brewing project on the side, making mostly saisons, farmhouse beers, is whatever, sour beers, whatever. Really, really nice stuff. I've been super impressed with. They make a pilsner too. Yeah, they've got some depth.
I was blown away by everything I had from them.
Yeah. Super, super nice people out there as well, running that show, and just and Halifax is awesome. Everyone's super nice. Always recommend.
Yeah. Well, everybody in Canada is super nice.
That's not true.
That means that I haven't spent any time west of Toronto's about as west as I've been in Canada. So.
Oh wow, there's a lot of country to explore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's also a huge country with not a lot of people, so it's hard to explore.
Sounds awesome.
I would recommend get up to Vancouver. Vancouver's rad.
Awesome things.
Alberta's awesome too. Spent some time out there last year. Have not had a chance to hang out in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, but we'll get there for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know, blown away. Never been more blown away by the enormity of Canada, not being able to travel. So
yeah. This is like the longest I've gone in probably 5 or 6 years without traveling. And I put myself on a travel ban at the first of the year for like 3 months. I was like, I'm not going to go anywhere. I need to just like chill and like be here and make beer and whatever. I look back and I'm like, would I have done that knowing that I was going to be like forced to stay inside my apartment for another 3 months? I probably would. I probably would have still made the same decision. But it's been, our place isn't huge and we're both here a lot. Cabin fever is happening. Stir crazy.
Yep. I know that feeling.
We've gone through a lot of our cellar, which has been
nice. Yeah.
Interesting. We've had a lot of really bad barley wine, a lot of really bad stout.
Yeah.
The full life cycle of a beer is that once you age it for 12 to 15 years, it turns back into wort.
Yeah. That's funny, eh?
It's terrible.
It's full circle.
Yeah. We had some Gale's Old Prize Ale that Pat had bought when he was probably like in college or something, or earlier. I don't know. And oh my God, it was awful. It was some of the worst liquid I think I've ever consumed. It was from like 1999.
Yeah. I don't know. Like I get the appeal of aging beer, but it almost never works out.
Yeah. I don't plan on ever really doing it ever again. Max a couple years for a stout.
Yeah.
Or a barley wine. Like
sure.
max 5 years.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like it's not going to get better.
No, exactly.
If
Like
you're lucky,
even that-
it'll be the same like level of quality.
Yeah.
If you're lucky.
Like I know like the lambics say, 15 years, but it's probably still best within a couple of
Fresher than
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had some really old lambic too, and it's an interesting sensory experience,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful to have had it. But from a like drinkability and just like hedonic perspective, it would have been better to have been enjoyed while it was still spry. My opinion.
Yeah.
But
Generally agree. Yeah.
to each their own.
Do you think with obviously everyone being stuck at home and a lot more home cooking happening, do you think that there's, especially just because the cards have always been stacked against beer as a pairing option in restaurants, do you think that we can see a resurgence in, beer being a serious contender for food pairing?
It's a really great question, and I hadn't really thought about it in that context before. But I think, I mean, beer is such an amazing thing when it comes to pairing, and I think that, because people just don't, like generally people don't pay a ton of attention to what they're eating and drinking. It's hard to be like, well, but what about when you put them together? It's like, I didn't even really notice when they were separate. But I don't know. I think that there's probably an opportunity there to bring a little bit more awareness or attention to that. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I'm curious how most people are faring with like the cooking at home thing. I enjoy cooking, but I'm definitely not like the greatest chef. Pat, however, is a good chef and he really enjoys cooking. And obviously we drink beer all the time, but I would imagine a lot of people out there are suffering from not having like a ton of really great food.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think you bring up a really great point. I definitely think there's an opportunity there for a little bit more exploration if we could, manage to connect with enough people to remind them to be aware of their beer and food experiences at home.
Absolutely. I think there's opportunity. Like people in a lot of ways have, or a lot of cases have the time. Why the heck not, right?
Yeah.
What do you like eating with Saisons?
Oh man, Saison is like the most versatile.
It does everything. It's like
It does.
it's like champagne. Like, yeah, it can do everything.
Yep. Yeah, I would say that like it's not my go-to for something that's like really, like a steak. I probably wouldn't reach for a Saison. But if I had a Saison and I had a steak and I was like, okay, how could I cook this steak so that it would go well with that Saison? I could do that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Saison, I think, goes so well with so many different things. You can pair with just about any kind of cheese and have an interesting experience. You can pair it with creamy foods or rich foods because the carbonation and the bitterness will cut through all of that. If it has acidity, it'll cut through that.
Spice.
Yeah.
Everything.
Something that like, at Jester King, we made that beer Schnorkel. The oyster mushroom and alderwood smoked sea salt Goza inspired beer. It was Garrett's recipe, and it was one of my favorite beers. He's such a phenomenal beer maker, and that recipe I think was like one of his very best. And we paired it with so many different things, doing like beer dinners with chefs, and it was one of the most interesting, like talking to chefs about that beer. One of the most interesting things because that beer had all of the things that the food was supposed to bring to the table in the pairing. Like if you think about, the sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, the 5 conventionally accepted flavors, typically your beer will have the bitterness and the sweetness. And so your food would have the acidity, the salinity, and the sourness. But for that beer, that beer would bring the umami and the salinity and the sourness. And so the food was responsible for bringing the sweetness and the bitterness. And so chefs would drink that beer and they'd be like, what am I going to do? Like, this is the most counter conventional thing to pair with. And that, I think that experience and like talking to chefs about that beer specifically and learning how to pair that beer with food, I think really shaped the way that I approach beer and food pairing generally. Because that beer is a hard one to pair with. Because like, what food is simultaneously bitter and sweet?
Grapefruit.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Chocolate sometimes.
Chocolate, yeah.
We paired it with eggs a lot. People would always want to go like fish with that beer, but it was a really like same. I mean, I've had like good pairings with fish with it, but it wasn't like, mind blowing or anything. But yeah, like a really good poached egg on top of a like watercress salad or something. I don't know. There was always interesting, and I think too, snorkel is just like a nautical name, and so people are like fish.
Right.
It was smoked trout dip, which I have no problem with. I love smoked trout dip, but I can talk about for like months.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to go fish and mushroom. That you can go a little too funky. I don't know.
I mean, you could definitely go funky.
Yeah. That's I'm very curious to see how the culinary world and the beer world start to intersect a little bit more as well. I know that there's brewers starting to experiment with things like koji, and I know that the chef world has kind of gone crazy for a lot of those kinds of food fermentations, and so starting to see these things melt together, and seeing brewers playing around with koji and chefs playing around with malt and beer yeast. Like, I'm seeing a lot of cool stuff happening. So there's a lot of exciting possibilities there as well. Yeah.
I, there are a lot of, there are a couple places here in Chicago that do the like beer and food pairing as like their thing. I think we may have talked about going to Band of Bohemia while you were here, but we didn't obviously make it over there because I love a good taqueria, and we went to a good taqueria instead. But yeah, there are a lot of people that are trying to do the like, and Moody Tongue is another one here. They're doing the like beer and food pairing thing as like their shtick. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. But I also think that like the learning curve for most consumers is pretty steep. And so it needs to be like a really approachable, like you don't have to come and try the pairing, but the food's going to be killer. The beer will be killer on their own. And then if you are willing to like entertain us with our pairing suggestion, you'll be really pleased with that too. But I don't know if we talked about this when you were here, because I do remember us talking a bit about koji.
Probably.
Yeah. It's hard to find like really good koji here. Like a lot of the producers or suppliers of that in Japan aren't interested in sending it over here, is what I've been told anyway by other brewers that are a little bit more in deep on all that. Lafler and I made a beer a couple years ago with koji. He made me rinse the rice a lot for a long time, and we added the koji to it, and it was a really beautiful Saison. And he makes sake over there otherwise too. Cool. So, but it sounds like he managed to meet somebody that put him in touch with somebody that trusts him enough to send him like real koji that's like several different strains that are good and interesting and stuff. I wish I'd picked his brain a little bit more on all of that, but it's definitely a realm of, modification of your starting materials that would make for really interesting fermentation profiles down the line that I would love to learn more about. But
Yeah, no, I think it's a whole world, and maybe we'll see some of that getting explored a little bit more by breweries. But you're absolutely right that the ingredient availability is a challenge. Like, you can get koji in North America, but yeah, the selection is not as great as if you're bringing in directly from Japan. So I think that some of us are definitely thinking about this and tinkering with this. It's definitely been a big challenge for us. Like, being a company that's got pretty good at growing things in a liquid state, to then figure out how the hell do we grow a bunch of stuff on rice.
Yeah, solid.
We're like, oh, we're really good at growing microbes in liquid, but now we have to figure out how to grow it on a solid substrate. But there's so much cool stuff out there. Like, I know I've been experimenting a lot with koji at home. So was Jonah from our team as well.
Nice.
And there's just like a lot of cool stuff out there. Like, there's one strain that we grow on. If you grow it on barley, it smells like mushrooms and vanilla. It's this like crazy thing. And there's another one where you grow it and it makes citric acid. And you can grow koji on grain, on barley or whatever, and get this like citric acidity from it. So it's like
acidulated malt.
Yeah, but like citric. So it's like, can we use this to add like depth and complexity to even to like kettle sours or something like that, right? Like, there's a lot of interesting possibilities.
Yeah, we should talk more about that later.
Okay. For sure. Yeah. Yeah, getting into a whole other fungal world. And I think that's just like, going back to that discussion about the malts, is like there's so many possibilities out there that no one's even really taken the plunge in just making available to people, right? Mm-hmm. And that the catalog we see from ingredient suppliers is limited by what that supplier thinks is commercially viable, not what they can do.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll start to see that changing.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, koji's a challenge. Most breweries are not equipped to deal with this stuff, but I think there's a lot of potential there in the future.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that makes me want to learn more about that. I don't know shit about koji.
No, we're just learning too. I love that I can, the thing that's cool about the molds is they're just big compared to yeast. So I can just like take a plate, an agar plate, put it under the microscope, take pictures of these like, amazing, spore structures and stuff like that. So, even when we get around to marketing this stuff, I have like hundreds of pictures of just.
That's awesome.
Mycelium.
Check out mycelium.
Yeah. That's if I get spare time at the lab, I'm usually taking pictures of weird stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you ever like take those photos and put it in front of your bread yeast as it's rising?
Oh, like inspiration or like. Well, that's weird because it's like, hey, here's your cousin. You're right.
It should definitely be a more unrelated species.
Yeah. Or just like a picture of yeast.
Yeah.
So it's just like a mom and dad thing. Yeah.
I mean, I play a lot of music for the yeast, so I think they appreciate the arts.
Mm-hmm.
You're like,
no, I mean, I think people have. Actually, I don't know the outcome of this. I know people have like tried to study that, and in some way the science is there that like I know yeast are responsive to vibrations in some way. I don't know if playing metal versus classical music makes a difference. Apparently, it does for plants. So,
I usually play funk.
Funk, yeah, that's a good call.
Yeah.
I was gonna say we have a pretty mixed playlist of escarpments, and that helps. Just keep a good balance.
Do you have that published somewhere? Is that like something I could follow on Spotify?
Oh, we should do that.
You should.
Oh wow. Okay. Yes. We're gonna be releasing our first single soon.
Excellent.
It's going to be a metal track. It's going to make sense also. This makes no sense right now, me talking about it, but it will make sense in the future.
I can't wait to hear it.
But a Spotify playlist, that's a good idea.
I think it'd be rad.
Do that. Yeah, absolutely. Just like sounds of the yeast lab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
Why not?
That's awesome.
I wouldn't be a good contributor, but if you want me to contribute a song, I could probably pick one out.
Okay. A buddy of mine showed me this band from Japan that's called Mass of the Fermenting Dregs, which I think is like very appropriate.
That sounds amazing.
It's just like a female-fronted, kind of like pop punk kind of sounding band.
Nice.
But yeah, very, very, fermenting dregs. It's very appropriate.
Is it fermenting dregs or fermenting Gregs?
Dregs.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's fermenting Gregs out there too, but yeah, no, dregs.
Math rock.
Math rock. Yeah, it's like very much like all of those like early 2000s tropes, in there. All of the stuff that I, really loved in high school and still love, and but Japanese. So that's some good stuff. I'm glad someone in the audience knows what the hell I'm talking about. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Focused audience. I love it.
I felt like that was a pretty deep. That was a risky. Yeah, that was a deep cut. But
yeah, it was. But somebody knew. I'm super impressed.
Mm-hmm. All right. We're at about an hour and a half. I think I had told myself that this is about how long we would go on.
It's not 5 hours, but
yeah, it's not 5 hours. I know your last one of these things went on a little bit longer, but I also cherish Pat's sanity as well, and
he appreciates
my own sleep quality. So, is there anything else you want to plug or discuss? And how can people in these troubling times get their hands on some Keeping Together beer?
Well, at the moment we are only selling it out of the Half Acre bottle shop. It has seen a tiny amount of like really tiny amount of distribution. I've sent 3 cases of the first beer out, 1 keg of the first beer out for events. We haven't sent anything out for the second beer because obviously the situation. So yeah, if you can make it to Chicago, that's great. You can order it online and swing by and pick it up outside of the bottle shop. And then beyond that, there will probably be a bit more distribution in the future, assuming there are still bars after the situation. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what Keeping Together is and about, we've got the website, www.keepingtogether.com. I made the decision to not have a separate social media handle for the project because the lifestyle that I want to live does not include multiple Instagram accounts. So it's at Averie Swanson on Instagram. I don't Twitter or tweet really. So there's not much there, but Instagram would probably be the primary mode of information gathering for Keeping Together updates.
Awesome. Yeah. Looking forward to seeing, what becomes of the beers that you're working on. And I think it is really exciting stuff. And I'm glad that people are excited about it and, following along with what you're up to.
Me too. I'm stoked. We didn't touch too much on this earlier, but I very much had a vision of trying to create a beer brand that wasn't really a brand, and tried to create something that had an inherent, evolution to it. So the idea would be that it's a brand that changes a lot and that, inhales and exhales, I guess, for lack of a really concise way of talking about it. It's something that, I want to change over time as I change and as the industry changes and as the world changes. And at the end of the day, I just want to be able to collaborate with my mix culture and collaborate with people that enjoy the beer, and make cool stuff that people are excited about. So that's about it.
All right. No, that's awesome to hear. Really excited for what the future holds for you and for beer in general. I know times are tough right now, but one thing that's been shown time and time again is we have this awesome community of people, and we help each other out, and we'll get through it, right? And come out stronger on the other side.
Yeah, I would make the argument that beer makers and brewery owners are beer people are some of the most resilient and adaptive and collaborative people. And these are the three attributes that I think will get just about anybody out of this thing with some semblance of sanity and humanity and love. So we're already in a pretty good position. It's just a matter of reminding each other and supporting each other.
Absolutely. One final question, because it is something I wrote down. What are you reading these days?
I saw that question and I was just like, do I want to answer that like really, or do I want to just the 4 books that I have on my desk right now, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which
I just finished that. Yeah.
I read half of it a few months back, and the first part's kind of slow because it's all like history and stuff, but still super duper interesting. And I got into part 2, and it's really interesting. He starts talking about his personal experiences, which are fun. But I love his writing and his work, and I'm excited to finish reading that book. I've got Historical Brewing Techniques on the desk also, which I had skimmed through a few months back. The Brewers Publications asked me to do a review on it prior to publication. So I'd gotten a sneak peek, but I'm excited to finish reading the whole thing in its final form. And then I've also got the Glute Lab book, because living in these 4 walls and not being able to go to hot yoga like I was doing before this quarantine, been doing a lot of thrusts and glute bridges. And I decided that I was going to buy this book, which turned out to be like a textbook. So for anyone looking to, work on their glutes, I would highly recommend the Glute Lab. There you go. I answered it honestly, as opposed to.
No, that's a good eclectic collection, I think.
Hits all the points.
Yeah.
That I'm interested in, I guess.
100%. Yeah.
And then I see down here that we have an ask a question. I don't know how to see that.
The question was about whether your beer was in distribution.
Okay.
And whether distribution is available in Florida. So I think that was somewhat addressed. Okay.
Cool. I was like, there's a question. I don't know how to look at it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know that I can access it. So yeah, the answer is
nothing in Florida just yet. But maybe one day soon. Maybe I'll be at Wake Fest next year. We'll see.
Okay.
They invite me every year, and I haven't been able to make it. So
cool. All right. Well, I think it's probably about time to sign off, but I do want to, thank you for your time, Avery. I think that was an awesome discussion. Hopefully, everyone got something out of it. I really like to, obviously we love to present all these technical things, but it's also nice to get into some of the philosophy behind why people make the beer they do, because, at the end of the day, that matters, a lot as well. So, really appreciate your perspective. As always, I think it's very, very needed, right now in the present climate of beer. So yeah, thank you for coming on here and sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a great time, and I love talking about it. And as much as I love all the technical stuff too, I don't know. I agree with you that I think a little bit more poetry in beer would probably not be a bad thing.
Yeah, poetry and beer. Okay, let's leave it off at that high mark. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye, y'all.
Have a good night.
You too.